Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 460, featuring Vikkal Parikh, who is really interesting. He is a creative director and founder at Ataboy Studios. Now, before I get into the details of Vikkal's episode, I want to first apologize that I did not put an episode out last week. I've actually been working on a huge project, and the schedule just did not allow that to happen. But I want to let you guys know that this is something really big that I'm very excited about. This is arguably one of the biggest projects I've ever worked on, especially at Chaos. And it is all part of the Innovation Lab. In fact, Vlado was here all week last week, and we spent the whole week together working on this, and it's a big deal. And just to give you guys a little bit of a teaser, it involves real time, it involves ray tracing, and it involves filmmaking. So lots of really great stuff going on there. And I'm very excited to talk about it as we go along. So I'm giving you guys a little bit of teaser every week to let you know more what's going on. Another thing I want to guys let you know that this is actually a collaboration that I'm working on with my guys at Martini Giant. You guys know Martini Giant is another is my other podcast that I do with my good friends Daniel Thron and Eric Sheely. And we've come up with some stuff that we're working on with Chaos Innovation Lab, and this is all sort of working together, which is super, super exciting. Okay, so you'll hear more about that as time goes on, but I just want to give you guys a little teaser and, of course, an apology for the week late on the podcast. But Vikkal is great. It was really cool to have him on this podcast and to talk about his background. He actually has a similar background to me. He comes from architecture, and he had his architecture education around the same time as me, so he came into the CG portion of that around the same time, so it was really kind of interesting to hear his perspective on that. He did turn that into a career in advertising and CG as well, and it was great to understand how his architecture career helped solve some of the creative things and some of the problem-solving skills that he developed along the way. Really, really cool. Obviously, advertising has changed a long time since I was involved in doing advertising. And so I want to ask him more of those questions, especially in a world where social media seems to be the prominent platform for advertising today. And just the concept of what it's like to do a 6-second ad and how do you get your point across and those types of things. So really cool to see that. So thanks, Vikkal, for coming on and telling us all about it. Okay, got a couple of announcements in terms of our products. You can go to chaos.com for that. Vantage 2 Update 2, I mentioned that a few times, is out. It includes displacement and hair and fur. It is a great, great product, and it is vital to the project I'm working on right now. So I'm very excited to announce that. So make sure to check that out. We also have V-Ray 6 Update 2 for SketchUp and Rhino that includes updates for V-Ray for Grasshopper. Now, if you guys want to know more about those products, of course, you just go to chaos.com. In terms of events, we have many events that are listed right now. Just go to chaos.com/events. One event that I do want to get you guys to know about is Chaos Unboxed Live, which is happening on February 27th. And that's going to be a live event online, but there's going to actually be some in-person events as well. If you want to know more details about Chaos Unboxed and get announcements and updates on the subject, just go to chaos.com/unboxed. Again, that is chaos.com/unboxed. Now, in terms of the podcast, if you guys want to follow that, you can always go to our podcast page, which is chaos.com/CG Garage. And of course, our social media page is facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. If you'd like to watch this podcast, all of our videos are posted at youtube.com/Chaos Group TV, including the podcast. And if you'd like to have suggestions of podcasts like this one, which was actually a suggestion as well, you can always email us, labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 460 with Vikkal Parikh.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, You need to make sure everything has for now.
Okay, Vikkal, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate your time, and obviously you've got some fabulous work that we want to talk about. But what I always love to start these podcasts is find out a little bit of people's origin stories. Where did you get the bug to do the kind of things you do and work with videos and images and graphics and animation and all of those things? What was some of the things that inspired you in the beginning?
Oh man, so that really dates back to my really education in architecture and being really, inspired by light and inspired by composition and inspired by negative spaces. And, really it was more of the design aspect of architecture that attracted me in the beginning. And then it was just about the time when visualization in architecture was starting to happen using 3D Max and, people who are producing these.
About the mid 90s or so like that?
Mid 90s, yeah, mid to late 90s. And it was really fascinating at the time where you're like, oh man, these designs that, we have on paper, we could actually fly through and move around. So essentially that's really what led to my discovery of, how to incorporate moving images.
And did you learn those specific CG skills? Did you learn them in architecture school or did you sort of pick them up on
them? I started learning them in architecture school. There was no YouTube back then, so it was really hard to learn. So it was literally lunch hour was a big thick Maya or 3D Max book that you would go through, try to troubleshoot things or learn new techniques. And everything was fairly new, so I don't think there were educators that were as experienced as there are now.
Yep.
So whoever was comfortable in the software was, teaching, and they were figuring things out as we went along. So really a lot of self-discovery, but that's really what drew me into it. For me, it was oh, this is sort of a territory where people are not really familiar with what to do, and I'm really interested in it. Maybe this could be a way of self-expression and figuring out how to translate my design. So I went to Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia, to do my master's in fine arts. And, there it was great. The program was computer art, and we didn't really have a specialty we had to choose. So, we did a little bit of filmmaking, a little bit of motion design, a little bit of sound design. So it really got us into all aspects of moving images, so to speak.
Now,
the first time.
Were you so when you I mean, obviously you started with the architecture. By the way, I have a very similar background. I was also an architecture person and ended up having, because no one else knew it, I ended up having to teach the classes as well. So I know kind of.
Yeah, it's exactly what.
Yeah, but I mean, what moved you away from architecture? Did you actually practice architecture, or did you go straight from architecture school to Savannah?
So I did practice architecture for a few years, and it was a lot of fun. And I still like doing the left and right side of the brain, where you're working with materials and working with our engineering, how things fit together. I think the pace was a little slow for me to see the designs materialize, and I would have been okay with it in the long term. With this computers and graphics, I was like, oh, we can make this and see what it looks like right away with the right material and don't have to wait for, execution. So that really drew me into wanting to learn this more. And, I'm very influenced by a lot of, organic architecture like Calatrava engineering or, Zaha Hadid's architecture. That's very organic. So just to try to get that beyond the sketch phase, you have to sort of do it, computer visualization. There's no other alternative to that. So I think, that essentially led me to, and by the way, there was no term like motion design or there was nothing of that nature.
Right.
So yeah, and then movies like Matrix, and you're just yeah, this is what I want to do.
So what were, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, the things that sort of seemed to inspire you at that time were things like Zaha Hadid and The Matrix, right? That was kind of an interesting
Yeah,
combination, right?
yeah. And, I think it's sort of this dystopian world, but like there's still like, people are existing within that world and it's similar to ours, but you can see that we are leading towards that and we could take a turn for the better or worse. So yeah, I think like those sort of uncertainties in, the future, I think that really helped me. And also like being into music and stuff, I feel like just progressive art and animation. I was never exposed to animation as a child, like, as opposed just from besides watching movies, like there was not, I didn't know a single animator or anyone that worked, in that industry to be influenced by a person. So yeah, I think when I came to Savannah, I was like, ooh, this is fantastic.
And what was your first, I mean, obviously, I mean, speaking as someone who also went through an architecture thing, I was sort of obsessed with the visualization, the lighting, the composition, but animation is like a completely different part of the brain. Like, how did you think about addressing that part of it when you were starting to think about it at Savannah?
Yeah, so at Savannah, like I said, we did a lot of generalizations, so like visual effects was, something that came easily, like in terms of
Sure.
photography, being interested in that, like that sort of like kind of got the concept of it. But it's just like, skeletons for animated sort of objects and oh, I got a thumbs up. Skeletons for animated objects, or like making them move, or proportions that are not normal, like just having the ability to be able to rig that and animate it, for characters. I think that was something that was a challenge at first for
Sure.
me, like just like having no experience in traditional animation. That was definitely a challenge. But again, like when, in the younger years, like you kind of want to learn it all and you want to know, and we were so entrenched. And that's the beauty of, going to a small town like Savannah was like, there's really not much to do else, like, yes, it's a great, beautiful tourist destination, but you're living there, there's not much going on. So, you sort of just immerse yourself within the program you're in and, try to learn as much as you can. And, really everyone was very encouraging at that school. So no one ever said like, oh, you're terrible, don't try it. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
they're very, very, I mean, when I got there, I had never opened After Effects. I
Right.
knew Photoshop to a very basic level. And there were kids there that was just like, they knew the software inside out. And, but that just made me want to work harder and learn, things that were different. So,
What did
yeah.
you feel your strengths were when you walked into that school? You know, having the background you did you feel you had a certain strength that was part of your personality?
Yeah, because of my background, I automatically felt like visualizing space and
Hmm.
distance was really something that came very easily to me.
Sure.
When like you're trying to visualize a space or, design a space or design an environment, um, obviously all these softwares translate real world parameters, right? So like a foot would be like 20 pixels or
Right.
whatever. So,
Yeah.
and we were so used to working like that, making models in architecture. So, for me, um, when you're making a cube for a character to live in, for me, it was really easy. Like, yeah, this seems like a perfect size. And there's no method to that madness. Just came from practice.
Right.
That this object could be housed in something this big, and that just very natural. And that also translates now, to whether it's like building sets for, live action production
Yep.
or like miniatures. I'm able to conceive scale and conceive, sort of these, models that are being made, whether it's like life size, double size, or miniatures, to a pretty good accuracy where like that's not a challenge for me.
Yeah, I find it's interesting because you and I are not alone. There are a lot of actual architects who have gone
There
into
were,
animation or done visual effects or done a lot of things in that nature. And I think it's kind of interesting how that transition happens. But what it seems to be a common trend, and I'm sure you agree, is that we have no regrets of having gone to architecture school. We think it's actually an extremely valuable education, even if we don't practice architecture, right?
I agree. I think it's a very good foundational educational skill set that anyone in the visual communication or, sort of education should have. And I feel like there should be, and that's why Legos are so great. Like I have 3 kids and, I let them play with Legos. I think like that really helps. And, but I think there's certain, foundational skills that we learn in architectural design school that should be incorporated within a graphic design course or within a motion design course or character animation course. And I think it's exposure to sort of the different worlds that, you work with. The foundational thing is that you work with light, you work with materials, you work with scale. And I mean, essentially, that's what all visual forms work with. You don't work with typography, but you do in terms of signage. So I think it's all part of it. So I think it's a really great sort of foundational skill set to have going to architectural school.
Right. I remember it was very interesting when I was working as a visual effects artist, and we went to a bookstore, and there was a lot of architecture and art books there. And this guy who I worked in visual effects, he was opening up architecture books. I was like, "This architecture's crazy. There's a fireplace in the middle of the room," and I was like, "Wait a minute, you think that's crazy?" And I introduced him to Zaha Hadid, and they were like, I had no idea this world existed, and it was kind of like the surprise of like, there is so much more out there.
Yeah. And like in the 90s or even like early 2000s, like there were not very many built works by Zaha Hadid.
No.
I mean, she got
or even Frank Gehry or even those guys.
Oh, Frank Gehry, yeah. So they got a lot of commissions towards the end of their lifespan or career, and unfortunately, but I think it took them a lifetime to get where they did.
Yes.
It takes then just like working with scale and of different institutional building. I mean, it's not an easy task.
Well, I think it was interesting. There's a few people who sort of saw the vision of what they did, right? And then you needed a couple more, and then all of a sudden it became popular. Now Frank Gehry, I actually like the old Frank Gehry when he was doing things with chicken wire and plywood.
Oh yeah.
And when he started doing everything out of titanium, it was like, okay.
Yeah, that's very well. I mean, you have to eventually. There's a commercial aspect of every commissioned art that takes over, and I think it's like, don't you think like similarity in like filmmaking with like directors, be it like Spielberg, it's like so similar. It's like
for sure.
Once you reach that threshold, it's very easy to cross over, and it's very hard to like keep where you are because then you're not growing. You've already surpassed that sort of experimental, stage.
Right.
You can't keep doing that all your life. I think you have to like cross over to mainstream, or what you're doing becomes mainstream. And I think at that point, all bets are off. You're just
but I think those experimental phases where you sort of find your voice in some ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Play. Like you're playing.
Yeah.
And there's no. I feel like a lot of commissioned work, and I do feel like a lot of people, feel the same way. Like whether being an artist or a director, like a lot of commissioned work, it tends to start becoming a job sooner than you'd like it to be.
Sure.
So like that, they're like, play around, but then eventually like, but like I was really like looking at this and like I want this to be this, and at the end of the day it's kind of their money.
Sure.
You can give your spin on it or give your add your vision to it, but it's really hard to sort of get someone to be like, go run with it, do whatever you want, and we are behind you.
I think that's I mean, one of my architecture history teachers tell me the best architects is a combination of architect and client. Right.
Yeah.
You need the client who can enable that vision to take place, and also guide to the architect to do, because with an open slate you can't really do much either. You need a sort of a program to follow.
Yeah, you need a box to think outside of it.
Yeah.
When you have like a blank slate or just no box, it gets very hard.
Yes, absolutely. Restrictions are actually what make the best design.
Exactly. So, yeah, I totally agree.
Okay, so this is interesting. So I love how you're sort of thinking of equating some of the architecture designs and directing as well. So as you went through your education at SCAD, where did you go from there? Like, how did this sort of develop into your career?
So from SCAD, I came to New York on an internship, and it was at this place called Edgeworks at the time that was doing a lot of broadcast design and animation. And I was there for a period of 3 months, and the plan was to see what happened
Was it
next.
motion graphics mainly? Or
I mean, it was a lot of answering the phones, but yeah, essentially, it was motion graphics, concept art,
okay.
and so there was this. They were pitching this sort of TV show to MTV at the time, and I think they had to like produce like 6 or 7 ideas
Right.
for a TV show over the weekend, and we were interns, so they're like, hey, we have $500, just come up with some ideas, and for shows, and then working with the writers and stuff, like we figured out like designs and idea for, and one of the shows was called Room Raiders, which MTV picked up, and went to run for, I don't know, like maybe like a dozen seasons or so. So that Room Raiders was definitely sort of the opening title and design for it came from the architectural background, was these like wireframes that like become a room, and you had to like go through and see like certain parts. So the concept of the show was that you have a guy and a girl, or and the other person's in a van looking at the partner go through their room with a blue light, or it's like pretty collegiate stuff.
Sure.
But I think the idea is to discover something about a person,
Right.
and so like, you'd have like this 3D model that would like open up and reveal things. So so I think that was definitely a lot of architectural studies, and influenced by design of like looking at blueprints and stuff, that I came up with that design, and I think it was fun for a little while. And then after that, I discovered this freelance world, and that was amazing. It was unnerving at first, but then there were like so many studios like bustling, and you could like
Around
be
what
there for
year was this? Just to note about the bustling years.
this was like 2003,
Yeah.
2004. Yeah. So you had like all these like Throwback and Eyeball, and there's so many studios, and you were like hopping like 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there, and then my longest stint was with a studio called Perception, and I was there for a year, and then eventually there was this post-production place called Red Card that I freelanced with, and I had really no idea, like working in advertising, what it was like. I had worked as an art director at an agency for a little bit, freelancing, but really the post-production side of it really captured my attention. I was like, oh, this is great. Like agency's coming up with these comps or ideas, and directors are shooting it, and you're sort of putting a graphics package or editing around it. So I worked at Redcar for 6-7 years, and after that I decided to move on and start Ataboy, where I was able to control the narrative a little better.
Okay.
In terms of what work we were working on and what we were doing. So it wasn't just end tags and just little stuff. Like I really felt the urge to be able to tell stories with what we wanted to do. So we started working with a lot of nonprofits at Ataboy to be able to, in the formative years at least, so we could actually go in and shape the narrative and be able to tell a story that they needed to be told, but in a way that we felt was, a little more appropriate to our style, appropriate to our aesthetic, and just even the way to tell a story. It wasn't very linear. So that's how Ataboy came about.
So describe to, for some people who may not necessarily know the process of how a project like this, like give us an idea of the lifespan of a project. Say there's someone who wants to create a piece, right? Where does Ataboy fit in? Where does the agency fit in? How is the lifespan of a piece happen, and where do you come in?
Yeah, so over the years we've evolved, but traditionally speaking, you'd go to an agency, and this all changes from project to project. But generally, you have a client, say client A, that's big S&P 500 client, will have a contract with an ad agency that we'll spend X amount of dollars a year, but we need X amount of content, print, online, social, whatever, to be done. And the agency has a team dedicated to working on it. So you have, like from creative directors to art directors, there's a linear staff.
So like Toyota would have a whole group of people at Saatchi that work for them and or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that's the Toyota team at Saatchi, right?
Saatchi, exactly. Yeah. So you'd have that. And then, they come up with different concepts, and, not everyone can do everything. So once they come up with an idea like, oh, this will be like comedy, so it's like, oh, there'll be a comedy spot. And then they go out and, look for a comedy director that, sort of coincides with what they have a vision or what's been sold to the client. And, so a comedy director, gets involved, or maybe a lot of times it's more than one. Sure. And then they sort of want to see their interpretation of the script or the boards. And so then creatives what they call like a treatment, like a visual treatment. They go back and they come up with a visual treatment, which is a deck of references, photos with the script broken down really granularly, and how they see this whole idea panning out. And really, the agency and the client will have a walkthrough and then pick a director to work with, and that's really. We don't really do comedy, but essentially that's, the step where Ataboy would come in.
Right.
We would be one of the companies pitching or directing.
And you guys have directors and creatives as
animators. Yeah. Animators. So we have directors and animators, editors. Right. So essentially we started off with animation, and then, we decided like, there's such good working relationship with the clients that we had that they're like, oh, but we have like this, it's a 30-second spot, 20 seconds animated. We just need 10 seconds of a live action thing. Can you guys do it?
Sure.
And then like we were finding partners to do it. And then eventually we just kept working with those partners so long. We just, had them over as directors. And that's really how we sort of grew our directorial roster.
Right.
So yeah, we directed, do the post-production on it. Depending on the agency, they might have a preference with an editor they want to work with, or a lot of times the director has a preference of an editor they want to work with. So then, you work with an editor. That editor could be an Ataboy, could not be an Ataboy, sort of open dialogue at that point. And we finish this, edit the spot, do the color, finish, and then ship it out. If there's any animation, which at this point I think everything has like some sort of visual effects or animation to it, or cleanup for the least, then I think the studio at Ataboy gets involved. Sure. To try and accomplish that.
So it's interesting. I mean, obviously, you have a similar past to me, but I did some commercials as well. And back when I was doing it, we were just getting into HD, so that just shows how long ago it was. Oh, yeah. But it was all TV spots, right? So we had TV deliverable, and it was very simple. Specific. It was 30 seconds of animation we had to deliver. 720 frames at 24 frames a second. It was just very specific of what we had to deliver. And I remember that very clearly. But nowadays, it has evolved so much. There's so many different. How has this whole world changed with Instagram and TikTok and everything? Like, how do you guys do all these different deliverables?
Yeah, so having done this for now, like 4 or 5 years, I feel like this has been a gradual progression.
Sure.
4 or 5 years. So we just assume that every project that gets shot has to be delivered in 4 different formats. a 16:9, 9:16, 4:4, 5, and then one 5:4, and then 1:1. And so when we shoot it wider, so we have coverage.
Interesting.
When we edit it, we put like an overlay on top of it to see how everything fits, and then maybe for 9:16 or 1:1, you might have to move the things around a little bit to like keep it in frame and be visually interesting. But for the most part, we just work within a square
Interesting.
and then crop it as you go.
Yeah, but doesn't that leave a lot of empty spaces on the side that you constantly?
If you work with a square,
Yeah.
right, which is bigger than it's basically 1920 by 1920 square.
Sure.
And then so if you want to do 1080, then you crop the top and the bottoms.
Okay.
If you want to do the vertical, you crop the sides.
Okay.
So look, your picture is really, your hero is literally always at the center.
Right.
But like, being a director, like framing doesn't always work. You want the framing to be the first quadrant or the last quadrant. Like you kind of want to mess around with it. So when you're doing things like that, then you have to move the picture over for that particular aspect ratio for the edit. But the flow of the edit, the timing of the edit, the music, the color, for the most part, that stays the same.
Right. Interesting. I mean, I'm obviously used to vertical video now, looking it on my phone, but I can't, I don't know. I don't think my eye wouldn't be trained to compose for vertical video.
Yeah.
What about you? Has it been a hard thing to think about that in some ways?
It was a little bit of a learning curve, to be honest, like to figure out. And I mean, I think these cameras nowadays and technology helps a lot. So like literally now you can flip the monitor and on set, or like just turn the camera over and see what a vertical video looks like.
Yeah.
So I think like when we are composing a shot, the DP, you're like, okay, let's look at this frame, looks good. Now, just tilt the camera 90 degrees to just see what a vertical would look like as well. And, kind of get a sense of it. And then over time, you just start to, your brain like connects the dots and sort of, figures out the composition. And like everything, practice makes perfect. It's really you got to keep doing it over and over.
Sure.
And it becomes muscle memory.
And have you noticed a difference in style in terms of the narrative of things, things having to be shorter, like 5 seconds and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's like now just like you're hit in the face right away. Like there's the buildup is sort of gone. Or even if you're doing a buildup, I think there's, for a specific version, you might have to either make another version where it's like a quick, sell, or, I mean, they're 6-second videos, so that doesn't leave a lot of room for breathing.
Right.
So it's just really like the joke and the sell, like call to action. So it's really like boom, boom. It's like a 2-punch.
Wow. In 6 seconds.
In 6 seconds. So, because that's really when a lot of times, like on YouTube and stuff, you have pre-rolls that are, 15 seconds, but then you're allowed to skip after a certain amount of time.
Right.
So if brands are advertising, they still need to sort of convey the idea or the messaging or their product within that, time frame. So whether the user chooses to skip or no, the message comes across.
So actually, that's an interesting point. Is that the primary vehicle that you guys are gearing for? Is YouTube, knowing that that's probably the most likely place that your ad will be seen compared to like?
Yeah,
TV?
so we do know where the ads will go. So
Sure.
the media buys are usually in place when we are working on something.
Right.
So we know that this would go on Hulu, or this would go on YouTube. This would be on, so what they call it, like connected TV. So it could, pretty much be like now Disney does it, or YouTube,
Sure.
or like even streaming on your computer screen with on websites. But we know the media buy, so we can sort of figure out like how is this 6-second going to be different from the 30-second TV spot.
Right.
And so we are able to conceive that idea. And a lot of times when you're shooting, like you are doing things that are quicker and then things that breathe a little bit, like in terms of take. So now we sort of mark them in terms of like quicker take, more breathing. So when the editor is sort of putting it together, they know like if we go with this longer take, we might have to re-edit for the 6-second version.
Yes. Okay. Oh, this is fascinating to me. Sorry, I'm very because obviously so much has changed, and it's so interesting. The other thing that's interesting is, obviously, like YouTube or even Hulu and those things, those are much more targeted advertising in some ways, right? So they target a specific audience for who they're trying to do. When you guys are doing a pitch, even as a director or whatever, towards the agency, do you think about what you need to how you would get that target? What you need to add to your content to be more targeted towards that audience?
Yeah, I mean, that all those conversations have become so relevant,
Wow.
whether this is targeted towards, certain race or like, depending on, who you're trying to sell, like, that this beauty product might be great for, people with like slightly, darker skin tones, or this might, sunscreen might be good for, people with like slightly lighter skins. And then you sort of drill into the demographics, like, what is the general demographics? You can pull data, like, oh, in this region, like this is going to be airing, not nationwide, just Northeast. Then you figure out what, the demographic, and then you go into like selecting your locations, right? Like you want to appear that that they are not in a location which is alien to you. So you want to be in a location that seems very familiar. So you figure out like, okay, this demographic lives in, sort of this kind of, middle America, where like a ranch homes, it's like slightly longer homes, like they're
Right.
not many stairs. So then we start scouting for locations to match that as well. And again, casting is really important. So, when you're casting, we try to, which now has become great, and I really like it. We are sort of a mixed race family. My wife is Caucasian, I'm Indian, and I think like that's become like the advertising, where they're like, oh, like you shouldn't be able to tell what race they are. It should be sort of
Ambiguous.
ambiguous. Yeah, ethnically ambiguous is a big term. So
Really?
uh,
Yep.
yeah, so you look at ethnically ambiguous people, or like match them in a way where it feels like a little more general.
Right.
And it's true. It's true for urban areas, in the country where you're seeing a lot of mix in races, and people are sort of transcending borders and sort of mixing cultures, which is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess part of that has always been part of the advertising agency. I mean, people still refer to the United Colors of Benetton as the
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that was
yeah,
back in
yeah,
the
yeah.
80s, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
so
And
that
that was
that
a big thing. Like that was a big thing. But
hmm
like if you looked at Macy's or something, like their advertising or catalog would be, you know exactly what they're targeting.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
But now it's really like it's. I think everyone's a data point at this point, like in terms of advertising. So it's like, how many times have you clicked on a link on Instagram to make that buy? What's your
hmm
age range? And it's not as much as ethnicity. It's like, what's your age range? What's your spending power? Like how often, frequently you shop. And I think you have a profile that is made for you on all these social sites, and
Oh yeah,
advertisers, basically is like, yep, I want this profile, and I'm going to target to this profile.
yeah, yeah. Trust me, my Instagram gives me a lot of fly fishing videos. They know
Oh,
exactly
there
who
you
I
go.
am.
There you go. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And YouTube does that. YouTube Shorts, TikTok, they're all, it's really, I mean, they have to make money, and lots of it, just because, they're such big institutions
Right.
now that they've learned how to monetize it, and they're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean
Nothing wrong.
the internet has had for the last several decades it's become about advertising, right? And it's
Yeah.
taken over obviously. So as a medium, which is interesting. I find this all fascinating. So okay, so we covered how the different formats have changed. We've covered a little bit how the content is evolving, and but what about the technology? What about things that are a little bit different, especially in the CG world? What have you noticed that's changed in CG in the last few years?
I mean, a lot of real-time rendering.
Mm-hmm.
You're not waiting hours to render.
Sure.
With graphics. Would have been a lot better if they weren't like using these graphics cards to mine crypto. Yeah, the graphics card would be cheaper and would be available to a lot more people.
Yeah.
But I think real-time rendering, crypto, they all like came about, like AI, they've all come about like sort of at the same time.
Sure.
And that's really where we see like the bottleneck of where there's a big need for graphics, GPU rendering.
I find it interesting you say that because I was thinking about this. We obviously like a couple of years ago, everyone was complaining about crypto, right? About how it's taken over, and the demand for GPUs more specifically. And then Ethereum went to proof of stake, and then that sort of dropped GPUs.
Yeah.
But just as that happened, AI went on the other side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
And now it's just impossible to get a good GPU to do things, right?
So yeah, I think like real-time rendering, the technology I think is there. It's like 80% there. I think once things settle down, and I think Apple is doing like with their silicon graphic, like they're trying to like fuse it within the board, so you're not looking for. So I think once they optimize those things, it'll be great to be able to just visualize something and just have it render in another window while you're working on it.
I am all for it. I mean, I work for Chaos, and real-time rendering is a big part of what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we've been doing GPU rendering since 2008. And more recently, I've been doing a lot of things in Vantage with real-time ray tracing. And so to me, I am 100% about the interactivity. As a creative person, right, if you think about real-time, how has that helped your creative process in terms of doing things in real time?
You're open to experimenting a lot more. So, you were not like trying, for example, take a sphere and it's supposed to be metal. And then you're not just like going between brass and chrome. You're like, what if I throw marble on it? What would that look? And then instantly you can look at it and throw it out of your mental block that, okay, this does not work.
Because you didn't have to wait 5, 10, 15 minutes.
You didn't have to wait, yeah. And then you'd have to, make that decision. You're like, yeah, I'm not going to waste my time like putting marble. I know it might not work. Let's try that as a last resort. But like here, you're just like, oh, let's try it out, see what it looks like. So I think it really opens up a lot of doors for us in terms of being able to play around. And again, like the computing power is really now not as much of a barrier to work, where, in the past, like you'd have to worry about like computing power and how long it would take to render and optimize and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of new artists that are coming up too, like they're already growing up with beefy computers. So, when they're starting out, like it's not Pentium 4. I don't know what they were, but like you're like, oh, you're on a Xeon chip? That's amazing. I'm on Pentium. And
cost $1 million.
Exactly. Whereas these guys are on like, a 64 core machines at 15 years old. And, they're like playing around with Cinema 40 and, playing around V-Ray or, I'm not going to name competition, but, but essentially they're used to it. So they're not as, I would say like, conscious of like time. Like they are just like, oh, this is play around, let's figure it out. Whereas I feel like the generation before that I would put myself in, like we were really into optimizing and really into optimizing the lighting material. Like if we can put a fake reflection, then you'd not want it to do like a real-time reflection.
Oh, longer. you were same time as me when we used to put like negative lights under tables to create shadows.
Exactly. And you were like baking stuff in, and then
you're still in that. Well, I mean, it's a lot of cases when you're
faster.
working with
caches and
when you're working with real-time solutions like Unreal and stuff, you still have to do a lot of those optimizations, and that's also interesting. Like that's part of Anyway, I'm not going to get into.
But that's the thing. Like I feel like Unreal is at a stage where we were with Maya or whatever, like 15, 20 years ago.
2006.
And Unreal is at that stage right now, and I feel like it took 15, 20 years for Maya or Cinema 4D with the renderers to try to, like a lot of Mental Ray, V-Ray,
Yep.
or, now Arnold. Like, I think there were a lot of iterations and things got better and better. But I think for Unreal to make that leap would be a lot faster.
Yeah,
I
or
think
you can actually look at real-time ray tracing as a complete solution to this as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's what I've been working on. I've been working on Vantage, which is our real-time ray tracer. So
real-time ray.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's also, I don't want to get into that part of it, but it is interesting that this real-time idea of interactivity and things of that nature are starting to come into play. Now, if you look back to about 2000 and 15, 16, 17, the world was like VR, interactivity is going to be the thing. And it sort of died down, and now people are saying, well, now Apple's got a new VR headset. And I was like, is as a person that's creative, and I'm very honestly speaking, do you feel that VR is going to have another comeback due to like things like the Apple Vision, or do you think it's a little too late for people to really reconsider how VR is going to work in this area?
I honestly, I don't know. Like I haven't tried the Vision Pro,
Right.
but I feel like it's the way it's positioned is more of like a dimensional computing rather than a gimmick.
Sure.
So it's pretty much like you're getting your computer interface in like 3 dimension, and you're still working with a keyboard and stuff like that. So it might replace the monitor.
Right.
But it's so that's really I'm interested to see like what the adoption rate is, and also it all depends on the price point and how easily it is available, and how many people jump on to buy it. And for whereas the VR headset, although very, very cool, I think they're still cumbersome to wear and walk around in, and they have their limitations. I mean, it's great on a soundstage or like in a studio where you are able to not have obstruction, but in people living in real homes with toys on the floor, with kids, or even like a side table. I mean, you're just stepping on stuff, and it's I think the adoption process is a little slower for that. But I've seen the great stuff come out of that too. So I really think like Vision Pro, the way they're approaching is more about spatial computing, as they're saying, rather than a headset for like VR.
Right. I mean, there was obviously, for a big push towards, the metaverse or whatever we want to call it in different forms, either through Facebook's interpretation or Meta's interpretation or Epic's interpretation. What are your thoughts about that whole process and where we are now, sort of looking back at the hype cycle seems to have died down a little bit about what metaverse is and how it affects what you guys do at Ataboy and where you guys are going?
Yeah, I personally was not very invested in metaverse. It did give me a little bit of anxiety that if the world moves this way, like it's really like I'm a really people person. Like I want to meet people. I want to like travel, like see. I'd rather be in a studio chatting with people rather than doing, like a Zoom session. So. Yeah, I feel like it's good that the hype's died down, and the way it should be. Like we are social, like creatures, and I think as social creatures, there's a limitation to not being able to do an avatar. There's a place for it, but like I don't think in the real world you can replace real world interaction.
Sure.
So gamifying metaverse makes sense, where you're able to go to this like environment where you might not be able to go in real time, but like when you're doing real work with real people, I don't think I want to see an avatar of Chris and not Chris, like
right,
whether it's 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional doesn't really matter.
Sure. Well, okay, but I do want to go back to one other point you made. And very early, I'm sort of doing a callback. You were talking about, when you were in architecture and you were practicing architecture, the amount of time it would take to see what you'd built and have it actually built was very long, right? And the opportunity to see interesting design very quickly is also interesting. So the opportunity to experience great spatial design in VR is big, right? It's almost like an infinite landscape of real estate that you can build these things.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that landscape? Because I mean, personally, I thought it was like, it's such a waste of all the horrible design that was happening in the metaverse a couple of years ago, when they could have been really concentrating on beauty and nice spaces, right?
Yeah, and I think like it's every medium I feel needs a phase for maturity. And I feel like that's really where VR is happening. Like there's a lot of really great industrial applications to exactly your point. There are amazing places that are being created. Our buildings before they're built, they're visualizing it in VR and, experiencing it. So that's definitely still happening. And I think it'll happen more and more, but in a more specialized way and not to replace that's really kind of bringing me back was like it's not going to replace our physical interaction. I think it's just going to augment it to in a way where there are limitations in our physical interaction, and VR will augment it. So if we are using it to enhance our experience, I'm all for something. But if it's using it to just make us lazy and not travel,
Yeah.
I detest that. So.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, yeah. I do miss the smell and the touch and the feel.
Sure.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like even though like you're creating in this like VR space, it's kind of like something's missing, and I feel like it's the touch, the texture, and the tactile quality of it is what's missing. So it's you're not engaging all your senses.
Right.
You're engaging two, and then that sort of feels incomplete as an experience. And that's I think been my biggest hurdle in really being able to enjoy it.
Yeah. On it, what's interesting, I see lighting, honestly, to be very important. Like the lighting in Iceland is different than it is in Mexico.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but I also feel that the headsets can't convey that process, or even any TV. TVs can do it a little bit. There's an HDRness to lighting in real light, in real life, that I think is harder to achieve through headsets as a natural feeling.
But I think is that GPU. You feel like is it like processing that's stopping it?
No, I think it's literally the brightness of things.
The brightness.
Like, when you go outside and you go outside in Mexico, in Baja, Mexico, and your eyes hurt because it's so bright, that's a feeling you can't get from a VR headset. But it's kind of a cool feeling, even though it hurts.
Yeah. And I think that's the real world, right? Like that's really what, and in filmmaking, you explain that in terms of emotion. So you'd have an actor, like even though you can't feel it, you'll show someone you connect with feeling it.
Yes, the actor will perform.
Yes, and that translates to you.
Yes,
and then so I feel like that's why filmmaking is such a successful medium.
Right.
Even though it's flat, I think like there's this emotion transfer that happens instantly.
Right.
With VR and stuff, it's more about experiencing the space. And in terms of VR, like experiences which engage all your senses. So, like Disney or, Disney World or whatever, where you have like jets being sprayed while you're wearing a VR headset on a roller coaster, while that, or like a, blast of air comes through you when something flies. I feel like that's why it's more fulfilling and feels more real, because at home when you put on a headset, that's missing.
Right. Well, you're asking the viewer to do all the work for you, as opposed to letting someone else do the narration for you. Well, this is fascinating. Sorry, we got a little tangent with VR, but what is your feeling? What is the things that get you the most excited about your job? You mentioned some of the things you're doing, but what are the things you're like most looking forward to right now?
I think what gets me excited is like, it doesn't feel like a job. Like it just feels like a lifestyle. It feels like what I do. It's so integrated in my senses, in my, day, in what I want to experience every day. So it doesn't feel really like work. And I think that's, sort of what helps and keeps me going. However, what's really exciting to me is like being able to use technology to further our storytelling, or like tell stories faster, whether it's like faster rendering time to like do an animation, or using AI to generate concepts super fast, or like whether it is like camera to your computer in an instant, or like having the ability to capture, like 8K resolution files and like cropping into like a really tiny portion of it, and then zooming out. So I think it's just like being able to sort of play with that technology stack to tell stories is what really excites me.
Nice, interesting. And you guys, I mean, what are your thoughts about some of these new tools like AI? I mean, do you feel these to be beneficial to you to be able to get your story? Do you feel it to be a threat to your process?
I don't see it as a threat. I know a lot of people find it boring because you're not creating stuff.
Okay.
You're like, you're writing out like what you want and the computer is generating.
But that's still creating, right? You're still describing something.
It is, but you don't have full creative control over it. It's like a lot of times, like with people that are used to working in 3D, like I think it's almost like you're a maker. You're like, using your hands and, lighting source, trying to get that exact sort of frame. Whereas now you're telling someone or computer to do it and be like, no, idiot, doesn't look like this, try again, and like be like, you're closer, try it better. So it's kind of like right now it feels like having your kid do your work. Like
an intern, right?
An intern, and they're trying to like teach him to do better or get closer to your vision, and then eventually they'll know exactly what you mean. So you're training, it's a training program right now. So I mean, the process is boring. I wish there was like a better like user interface that made it like a little more fun and interactive to do rather than like typing out messages. Sure. But essentially, it's going to learn way faster than we did. Yeah. And I think it's going to change the game.
How do you think, think about your time at SCAD and what it must be like to be a person at SCAD today and how they're learning these things?
Oh, it's just crazy. I mean, SCAD now has like a virtual production stage.
Yeah, I know.
That kids get access. I'm like, what the fuck? Like we had like the Sony DV camera that we had to check out. So times are different. I think you just have to embrace it and really sort of enjoy where this progress is going, and hopefully it's not too disruptive to your process. Sure. If you can adapt it early on. And I feel like being artists and having I would say the journey from like architecture to like motion design, like directing, like having worked in so many different mediums, I try to keep my mind open to be able to adapt to something that I'm not totally comfortable with it. I think that challenge is also what makes it exciting every day to go to work. Right. And that's why I like to work in advertising, where short spurts, like you're on something for like 4 to 6 weeks and you're moving on to something else. Right. As opposed to architecture or like film VFX, where you're on
a year, 2,
like
3,
5 shots for 2 years, and like you're just generating smoke for the entire film. Right. And you're a smoke CD, and I think that would get boring for me, and it's like the little ADD in me, like really like, all right, what's next? Ooh,
well, it's kind of get back to your experiment thing, right? You want to experiment with a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, it's okay. You'll have another one in 4 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we try to make everything work.
Sure.
And I think that's the ethos of the company, is like when everyone you work with or everyone that works with you, like at the end of the job, you just want an attaboy. You kind of want to make sure like a job well done.
There you go. That's a perfect way to sum up where the company name comes from. Well, congratulations, and thank you so much for being part of the podcast. It was great to hear your story. Nice to see another ex-architect succeeding in the field of directing and creativity.
I know. What are the chances? Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.